Alex Pereira versus Sean Strickland. So I found out about this yesterday. It was fine. I moved right on. There was some other news that came out. Robert Whittaker was going to take on Vettori. I'm sitting here wondering, where is Paulo Costa and the whole thing? Had a day to reflect on this. I have a very different opinion. I have a very different thought. I hate the fight. I hate everything to do with it. And I don't mean I don't want to see it. I don't mean I'm not going to be excited when it comes up. There's a lot riding on this. Sean Strickland has done some heavy lifting. I feel as though maybe you guys don't know how good Sean is. Sean is very brand new in everybody's names. And I always make the comparison to Sean Strickland right here today and Belal Muhammad right here today. Because if you rewound the tape 12 months and put in every other fighter in the entire industry, nobody between those two, stock has gone up more. You might not have known what a Belal Muhammad was 12 months ago. He's a main event fighter now. He's a top guy. He's getting ready for #1 contenderships. If everything goes smooth, he's going to be fighting for a world championship within the calendar year of 2022. The same thing goes for Sean Strickland. The day I met Sean Strickland, 21 years old, we're at the Rain Training Center. He comes onto the mat. We do the embrace, which every fighter will do before you're about to spar around. Touch of gloves, right? But it's also our first time meeting each other. So he says a couple of things, I say a couple of things. Possibly he asks me a question, possibly I ask him one. But before our first round ever, he informs me that he's 17-0. Now, don't forget, this 21-year-old kid. This is a 21-year-old young man who I am not familiar with. I know everybody in the sport. We're the same weight class. He was an 85-pounder. He ended up going down to 170. He's an 85-pounder. I'm an 85-pounder. There is no truth. And I remember as I touched gloves, I'm touching gloves with a liar. I sparred the round with him, and I went over to my coach, Ryan Parsons, and I go, that guy claims he's 17-0. My coach looks at Sean, he looks back at me, and I go, and he just might be. Going 5 minutes, I knew he was good enough to be 17. I just didn't think he could get that many fights in. You got to be 18 before you can get a fight in the first place. Then you got to get licensed. Then you got to find somewhere to compete. Like, there was a lot to it, to where you just couldn't be 21 years old and be 17-0. And 5 minutes of working out with the guy, I knew he was good enough to be 17-0. I still thought that I had met a guy who would exaggerate. I go home and look him up. He was the king of the cage champion, and he started fight when he was 18, and he had 6 fights this one. I mean, it was just something crazy. And then he gets on his run. He goes through the UFC, does a lot of it at 170 pounds, bounces up to 185. You all know who he is. I'm sharing this with you because Sean Strickland has either won 7 fights in a row or he's won 8. I believe Sean is the true #1 contender. I do believe that. I believe the fact that Sean has won 7 fights in a row or 8 against the fact that Jared Cannonier's last fight had 1 completed round and no judge thought Jared won it, I think it's a compelling argument. I thought it was one that Sean should make. Now, Jared Cannonier earned this. I am not taking anything away from Jared. What I'm saying is, if I was in Sean's spot and I have to attack Jared as a way of getting what I want, that's the angle I would have gone. I have not lost to the last 7 men that I fought. You have not won a round in your last match. I would have gone with that angle. I don't know if that would have exploded. I don't know if that would have worked. I'd have got the spark going. I'd have seen what gas can get thrown on it. Sean didn't seem to care. Sean did not care in the least whether he's fighting Adesanya for a title or whoever the opponent was going to be. As a matter of fact, the last time I talked to Sean, he was pining for a fight with Paulo Costa, but up pops Alex Pereira. I'm giving you the background because you are not going to be able to keep Sean Strickland out of title talks for long. First off, the pool's already watered down. Some of these guys, Adesanya's fighting out of respect, out of kindness. Adesanya has a soft spot in his heart for Jared Cannonier because Jared was nice to him. I get that. You guys might not like the story, and I agree that that's a little anti-promotion in the world of promotion, but it's real, and it's true. And Jared should be rewarded for his hard work, and he's going to be in the form of a world title fight. That doesn't mean that Sean Strickland has to accept any of that. That doesn't mean Sean Strickland can't come punch in there and demand everything. But Sean Strickland's working an I'm crazy angle. He's having a lot of fun appealing to the Sean's crazy market. Okay, great. But if you're a decision maker, you got to really wonder, what's this guy going to do? If I put my belt around this guy, and he's not going to be front and center on the worldwide leader, and he's playing this, and I'm insane. What's he going to do? Right? It's problematic. At the same time, if he beats up everybody and what are you going to do? Now, that's where you insert Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is one of these guys who does not have the in-octagon experience as Khamzat Chimaev, but he's got the same reputation. I will submit for you, without reputation, Khamzat Chimaev is not where Khamzat Chimaev is. I appreciate those 4 fights. I appreciate the different weight classes. I appreciate the quick turnaround. All of those things were really incredible. It's the reputation. Khamzat Chimaev's got guys like Gustafsson vouching for him. He's got guys like Latifi coming out and vouching for him. He's got guys at Extreme Couture. Jake Ellenberger comes to mind, who have seen him in the practice room, and then they come out and they tell the public. The Michael Bispings and the Darren Tills of the world, nothing has got Chimaev as far as reputation. And I submit that for you because it's the same thing that Alex Pereira is operating on. Alex Pereira's got the win over Izzy Adesanya, which, believe it or not, is equal to nothing in our space. If you go, you're thinking, well, I know all about it. I want to see those guys rematch. You represent what's known as a hardcore, same as me. And we together represent what's known as 15% of the market. Us hardcore fans, as much as we love it, as much as we know what time it is, as much as we have all these things memorized, and if there was anything called MMA Jeopardy, we would be the first to win. We represent a very small part of the market. People don't know that they fought. It's as simple as that. The people that do know that they fought quickly dismiss the fight, as that has kickboxing, that has nothing to do with MMA. And then you're down to 1 to 3%. They go, to hell with that. These are both competitors, and I don't care what they're doing, and that keeps Izzy up at night, and he must right this wrong. Okay, you would be in the same category as Adesanya. You would be powerful, and you would have your thumb on it. I'm just sharing with you, that just makes you a really small group. At the same time, when you got Alex Pereira, who has Glover Teixeira, the sitting champion of the world, vouching for him. Glover is using Glover's interviews. Time for Glover to talk about Glover and what's next for Glover. And he's cutting out segments and handing it to his teammate Pereira, which I should mention for you is the same thing that Chuck Liddell did for Glover. If you were to rewind the tape to 2010, when Glover Teixeira finally got in the UFC, he fought in the UFC one time. Next thing you know, he's the co-main event on a pay-per-view opposite Rampage Jackson, but that was reputation. You get the right guy saying the right things about you, it goes a really long way, but it's very relevant to Pereira, because what are you going to do with him? You can't keep a guy that's got to win over Adesanya on ice for long. You just can't do it. Whether you think the sports have anything to do with it or not, believe me, they do in these fighters' minds. And believe me, that was combat. And believe me, Adesanya wants to get one back. It's very real. Not to mention, you own footage, you've got the story. I mean, you're talking about the world of promotion. It's a really big deal, particularly when we have Izzy Adesanya, who's earned himself a world championship with his stand-up skills. Like the X's and O's of that fight, I never saw that fight. I don't watch a ton of kickboxing. And in all fairness, I would dismiss kickboxing as it compares to MMA because the other guy could just take him down. But when I have Adesanya, who's never even tried to take anyone down, all of a sudden those X's and O's just got a lot more interesting. If anyone's to try to take the other one down based on what we've seen, it might be Pereira trying to take Adesanya down, which you might think spells disaster for Izzy. But without me ever proving my point, I just took 3 minutes of your time, and we're still on a topic of a fight that we don't have yet, which proves the match works. So how do you fast track it? How do you get this guy who hasn't lost yet in the UFC? He's not a household name. He hasn't fought a whole lot of guys. He's got a history with your current champion. He's got Glover Teixeira as the sitting champion of the world in a different weight class vouching for him. How do you fast track the guy? Well, you put him in there with Chael, and many of you believe is the rightful #1 contender anyway, Sean Strickland. Now you have some X's and O's problem for Sean. You really do. Sean Strickland is so darn good at stand-up fighting. Sean Strickland, you only got to be great at 2. You want to be a world champion, there's 3 pieces to fighting. You got on bottom, you got on top, you got on your feet. You've only got to be really good at 2 of them. You do not have to be good at all 3. And through the history of the sport, you're going to have a hard time giving me an example of anybody who was. You're going to have a really hard time finding me one single character in the history of this sport who was great on top, on bottom, and on their feet. Largely that's because if you're good at 2, you never see the 3rd. If you're on the ground, you usually get to choose whether you're on bottom or you're on top. It's the point of being good. Right? Do you see what I'm saying? So it makes for a very interesting match because Sean Strickland is awesome on his feet. There was even a piece that came out on ESPN. I call it CompuBox. The CompuBox could be a company for all I know. But I call it CompuTalks anytime stats come out. And it was talking about the defense of Sean Strickland because nobody had ever paid him credit. So they start breaking down how many fights he had. They start taking how many minutes he had been in. They start breaking down how many rounds he had. And they start talking about how few times he had been hit. I go back to my experience in the gym with Sean. I used to think that about him too. The same as I thought I had met a liar who was claimed to be 21 years old and 17-0. This guy's hard to find. He's standing right. Why is this guy so hard to find? I used to remember having those thoughts. So you fast forward a decade and ESPN all of a sudden is doing a piece on him. Then I start taking a little closer look because his fight with Jack Hermanson. Then I start watching some of Sean's training videos that surface on the internet and I'm going, he is hard to hit. He's very hard to find. Who's going to hit him? Who's going to find him? Well, how about finding the world champion in the sport of striking? It's very interesting. Now, when I talk to you about you have to be really good at two of the three. Sean is also a bear to take down. You guys will remember Jose Aldo. I loved to compare Jose Aldo to George St. Pierre because I thought they were equal while being opposite. George St. Pierre was the most dynamic and effective offensive MMA wrestler that the sport had seen. But Jose Aldo was the most dynamic and efficient defensive wrestler that the sport had ever seen. While George, who never had a wrestling match, could take absolutely anybody off of their feet, nobody, regardless of how many wrestling matches you had, could take Jose Aldo down. It was very interesting, the way that you could juxtapose and play those two against each other. And I bring that to you because Sean Strickland is a son of a gun to take down while being fantastic on his feet. In this fight, I think he's going to need some offense. He's not weak at it. Sean is not bad at it. Once you hit the ground, you're in a tornado. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a training camp with Sean Strickland, who is flat stubborn, who you have to grab and shake and say, Sean, you don't have to go out and kickbox with this guy. You don't have to prove that point. First, you're going to have to get through to him, which is going to be very hard. You got 3 months. You had better have got started yesterday. Secondly, going to have to sharpen up that skill. It would be very good whether Sean takes Alex down or not if Sean offers the threat of taking Alex down. And I mean right now. I mean, that bell rings and you come across and you change elevation. You make the guy wonder. If you offer a threat of a takedown, you will take a striker down a notch. Rickson Gracie weighed in this as it pertained to jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu going over into MMA. And Rickson said you can put a black belt in jiu-jitsu in MMA. You hit him one time in the face, he becomes a brown belt. You hit him another time in the face, he becomes a purple belt. You hit him another time in the face, he becomes a white belt. There's a lot of truth to that. But Sean doesn't have to actually take Alex down. He has to make Alex worry that he's going to take him down. Now, we got a lot of time before this fight. I just think that we are fast-tracking this. I think that Pereira is in for the middleweight division. I think that he's in that Chimaev spot. I think the reputation, all the talk, the fact that he's cornered by the sitting reigning champion of the world, Glover Teixeira, the fact that he has these words being said about him by some of the greats, I cannot imagine any other reason to put him in there with somebody that's won so damn many fights I've lost track. I don't know if Sean's won 7 in a row and 8 in a row. This one might be going for 9 in a row. He has had such incredible success. None of his losses were in this weight class. He's completely undefeated. There's not really a reason to put two guys like that together unless you're trying to shine one up to go right in for a championship. And I personally, truly do believe that that is what's at stake in this fight.